Hey, I'm Stephanie, and it's time for some makeup comparisons. Today is all about the eyes, and it's all part of my Panning for Gold series here, in which I pluck cosmetics from my collection that have similar claims, and then I pit those things against each other for a period of time so that I can figure out which ones are the true gold nuggets of my collection, and then I report back anytime I strike gold. But this quest for gold is high stakes because my aim is to declutter anything that isn't a gold nugget. And my reasoning behind it is just because it's not perfect for me doesn't mean it might not be perfect for someone else. Today, we're going to be talking about 2 eyeshadow palettes and 2 eyeshadow primers. And as always, I will include timestamps so you can hop, skip, and jump to whatever's most relevant for you. I figured that we could just go in order of application and start with the primers. The 2 primers that I chose to compare are the MAC Paint Pot in the shade Soft Ochre against the Laura Mercier Caviar Stick in the shade Vanilla Kiss. Ah, the MAC Paint Pot, a classic in the makeup community and for good reason. These things are very creamy, but they dry down nicely, creating a great blank canvas for any eyeshadow look you might want to create. This isn't the sort of thing that I can use alone on my eyes. I do know that some people will use these paint pots as single eyeshadows sometimes, but I can't do that because if I don't set these with a powder, they will inevitably crease and the oils in my eyes will eat them up. But as a base for powder eyeshadow, I do generally find that this is pretty good if I want to blank out the canvas and create a look. So the Laura Mercier Caviar Stick had a lot to live up to, and I wasn't sure it was going to be able to do it because this formula is a little bit thinner, a little bit more lightweight, is a little bit silkier, and so I thought it might not have enough staying power. And in truth, on its own, just like the paint pot, it does not have staying power on my oily eyelids. However, when set with powder, it does have better staying power. But when I was initially testing these at the same time, one on one eye, one on the other, I initially found that the Laura Mercier Caviar Stick just could not hold its own. It would crease easily, and it just wasn't giving me the longevity that I was hoping for. That is, of course, until I started experimenting with brushes. Once I began pairing the Laura Mercier Caviar Sticks with the Sonia G Fusion brushes, everything changed. All of a sudden, I could use less product, but still get the same amount of coverage. So I could have a lighter layer of product on my skin and yet get coverage. And the whole look was just smoother. Plus, I find that the less product that I have on my oily eyelids, the less creasing can happen. So I feel like that was a total game changer for me. Actually, with both of these products, the Sonia G brushes worked incredibly well. But once I started using the Sonia G Fusion brushes, all of a sudden, this one started to win. And that really shocked me. Something beat a MAC paint pot? Don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking the paint pot, but out of these 2 formulas, this is the heavier of the 2. I feel like in general, it's a little bit beefier, it's a little bit stickier, it kind of sticks to itself a little bit more, so it's slightly harder to blend. It's not hard to blend at all, but in comparison to the Laura Mercier Caviar Stick, it doesn't have quite as much glide, I guess I would say. And I have found that as I am aging and the skin on my eyelids is getting a little bit thinner and more textured, I'm beginning to really appreciate a thinner, silkier formula. So, which one's the gold nugget? They both are. I haven't lost any love for the MAC Paint Pot, even though the Laura Mercier Caviar Stick seems to have its nose forward in this race. So what am I going to do? Well, I don't need 2 of these types of product because creams can expire pretty quickly, and so I want to make sure that I'm not hoarding things that are just going to expire in my drawer. So I am going to give one of them away. This one. Now you might ask, why are you giving the one that works better away? And the answer is my mother is extremely interested in these caviar sticks, and I promised her that I would give her mine because I thought she would really enjoy them. I mean, the woman gave me life. A lot of the decluttered makeup that you see come through this channel comes from her. And also, she's one of my best friends ever. And so I always like seeing the look on her face when I give her something that I think she'll enjoy. So this one is going to move on to my mom, and this one is going to stay with me. And now it's time to discuss the eyeshadow palettes. I chose to pit Huda Beauty's The New Nudes palette against the Tartelette Juicy palette. Both of these are very pinky palettes, and I don't know that I need both of them in my collection. To be honest, when I was going into this, I was kind of hoping the Tartelette Juicy palette would win just because the packaging is smaller, more compact, and I just like the idea of having that smaller palette. But I'm not going to let the packaging influence the decision because the important stuff is what's on the inside. But speaking of contents, another reason that I was hoping that the Tartelette palette might win is because this one is not just a pink palette. It's also grounded with these earthy tones. So I could get a rosy look, a more intense pink look, or I could also add some neutrals for a more everyday friendly look. And that variety is simply not reflected in the Huda palette, at least not color-wise. Texture-wise, this has a lot more to offer, but color-wise, this doesn't have a whole lot of depth like the Tarte palette does, but it also doesn't have a whole lot of variety of color, even though one might think otherwise just looking at the pans. But in truth, every single shade in this palette kind of pulls warm pink. These purples pull warm pink. This cool lilac shade in the pan pulls warm pink on the skin. So in addition to the fact that it's all pink, and there's no really earthy tones to ground it, there's also not as much depth, which the Tartelette palette offered. So that's why going into this, I was pretty sure the Tartelette palette was going to win. But boy, was I wrong. And it wasn't because of the colors, it was because of the quality of the shadows. Unfortunately, it was very difficult for me to get a smooth blend with many of these shadows. And I felt like some of the shimmers in here were a little bit dry looking on the skin. It's not like they looked horrible, but in comparison to the Huda shades, which have a lot of dimension and sparkle and texture to them, these were just kind of very lackluster on the eye anyway. And this shade here, especially the one that I was missing in the Huda palette because it has so much depth, this shade in particular was patchy when I applied it. Unless, of course, I used my Sonia G Fusion brushes. But here's the thing. I don't want to have an eyeshadow palette that only looks good when I use a certain set of brushes. I want to be able to use it with all of my brushes because what if I'm traveling and I forget to bring the brush? Or what if the brush is dirty and it needs to be washed so I can't use it? Then all of a sudden I'm like stuck up the creek without a paddle just because I don't have the right brush. That's not how I want my eyeshadow palettes to be. Based on my experience with this palette, Huda really knows how to make a matte shadow. These blend out so softly. I could get such a great wash of color on the lid with a lot of subtlety, but I was able to build up the color to get a little bit more intensity. But I feel like these act almost like luxury eyeshadows in that way because they offer such a soft look. And these sparkles are so multidimensional. There's particles in there, there's different colors. It's just a very kind of sophisticated kind of metallic shade. And so everything about this palette impressed me every time I used it. Well, everything except the color range. But the shades that are in here, they're all beautiful and they all work so well. So I have to say, this one wins this battle pretty clearly. But is it a gold nugget? I think it is. This one's staying. As for the Tartelette Juicy palette, I don't think this is a horrible palette. It's not like I think this is the patchiest, most horrible, hard to use eyeshadow palette I've ever used. It's just that I have been comparing a lot of really beautiful formulas lately, and this one really just doesn't stand up in comparison. So I'm going to give this away because just because it's not what I'm looking for right now doesn't mean that someone else might not get a lot of enjoyment out of this. When it comes to my roll-ins, I thought I would do something a little bit controversial, at least when it came to the primers, and I would test a very polarizing product. The first one isn't the polarizing one. This is the Milk Makeup Hydro Grip Eye Primer, and I did test this against my Urban Decay primer potion in my last Panning for Gold eyeshadow video. So if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts about this, then I'll share that video in the show notes. You can check it out. But this primer is very good with shimmers, horrible with mattes, but great with shimmers. And I find the same thing with this one. The Pat McGrath Intensifies Artistry Wand. I hear people either love on this product or really hate on it. And I have only used this for very specific situations. I used to have like the Fenty Diamond It wasn't the Diamond Bomb. It was like a trio that had like a blush and a bronzer and a highlighter in it. And this was the only thing that could make that stuff stick to my eyes. And that is what I had been using this for. But I decluttered that palette just because it was so difficult to get it to do what I wanted it to do. And since then, this primer has gotten neglected. And so now I want to see which camp I fall into. Will I love it? Will I hate it? I guess we'll find out, so subscribe if you're curious. I'm a little bit scared to ask, but have you had any experience with this Pat McGrath artistry wand? If so, let me know in the comments what you think of it. I'm kind of curious to see how polarized people who watch this channel are, because wow, I have heard this thing get some hate. When it comes to the eyeshadow palettes I'll be rolling in, I thought I would stay within the realm of the rosy tones because I've really been enjoying wearing pink. I know, who would have ever thought those words would have come out of my mouth? But here we are, so I thought I would pit these two against each other. This is Lancome's Nude Sculptural Quint, and I will be pitting it against Charlotte Tilbury's Pillow Talk, the original quad. Is one of them a gold nugget? Are both of them gold nuggets? Like and subscribe to find out. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I hope that you'll like, subscribe, comment, all that jazz, but even if you don't, I hope you have a wonderful week and that we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.